Hello, and welcome to the first of today's Planted Unearthed talks, Nature Writing, the new perspective of working class women. My name is Karen Brazier, and I'm one of the founders of FOLDE Dorset, a specialist nature writing bookshop on Shaftesbury's Gold Hill, and I'm a friend of Planted. In wealthy countries, most of us are liberated from labouring on the land like the hunter-gatherers, miners and crofters that came before us, but we crave a closer connection with it, probably more so today than ever before. We recognise the mental and physical health benefits that come with being in natural landscapes, and we have finally woken up to the twin climate and biodiversity crises that we are causing. It's no wonder the nature writing genre is burgeoning. Yet, with a handful of exceptions, the historic canon of nature writing is overwhelmingly white, middle class and male. While the picture has certainly begun to shift over the past decade, why has the genre been dominated for so long by the privileged few? And what are the implications for people and planet when our natural world is seen through this narrow lens? Who are the new female and other underrepresented voices in nature writing? And what might we learn from their different perspectives? To help answer these questions, I am more than delighted to welcome two award-winning writers to share their experience and perspective. On my far left is Nicola Chester. Nicola was one of the early pioneers of women writing about nature, and is the longest-running female columnist for the RSPB magazine. She is also a columnist for Country Farm magazine and a Guardian country diarist. She has been an activist for nature all her life and has written an award-winning memoir, On Gallows Down, Place, Protest and Belonging. And on my immediate left is Jeni Bell. Jeni is a writer based in Wiltshire and draws her inspiration from nature, landscape and the stories and folklore that weave through them. Her work has been published in a variety of online and print publications, as well as featured on local radio. In 2022, Jeni won the Nature Writing Prize for Working Class Writers with her piece, Prayer to Sea. Nicola, Jeni, welcome to Planted.
Thank you.
The format for this talk will be a panel discussion for about 45 minutes before we open it up to questions from the audience. So if you have a burning question for any of our panellists, then do save them up for the end and we'll have a roving mic so you can be heard. Nicola and Jeni, I wanted to begin by asking you both about your own relationship with the natural world. And is that something that you have had since childhood, or a connection that perhaps has developed during your adult life? Nicola?
I think for me, it's always been there. I think as a child growing up, either on the edge of small villages or towns, that's what we did for entertainment. You know, Mum would take us out for long walks. I suppose I'm of that generation as well, that you just did that. It was just something that you did. So walking the dog or allowed to just go out and play. So it's something that has always been there. And that's a privilege. I look back now and it's a privilege. It's not something that's available now to an awful lot of people. So that's where it's come from. And I think my granddad as well took me out, took long walks again, and he lived on the very edge of Portsmouth. So we had to come out of the edge of the city onto the hill behind, big chalk hill, and explore, the nature that was around us then. So yeah, it's been with me from the very start, never left me.
How about you, Jeni?
So slightly similar to Nicola in that it's always been there. I didn't grow up in a particularly rural location. I grew up on a council estate just outside of the New Forest, wedged in between New Forest and Southampton. But I was very lucky that my mum especially was always pointing things out to me. She's always like, oh, what's that bird? Or what's that insect? So I was taught from a young age to observe. And that has just grown and developed as I've gotten older and mirrored my interests. But like you, I feel very privileged. I feel very honoured that I was brought up in a family that championed the natural world. So yeah.
So your upbringing was fundamental to that strong connection that you both still have now.
100%.
Yeah, absolutely.
15 years ago, the Scottish poet Kathleen Jamie wrote in the London Review of Books that nature writing was the preserve of the lone, enraptured male. And this is partly what has inspired this topic of conversation today. I was revisiting this essay. Why was that the case? And how much have things changed since then, do you think?
I think it's changed an awful lot, and partly because those lone enraptured males had a bit of a wake-up call and gone, oh, okay, let's do something about it. So actually they have reached out and sort of say, yes, come on, we need more of you, and that certainly happened in my case. But I think it goes back to there are always going to be far more male writers because they've got the ability to do that. The countryside, the great outdoors, the mountains are more available to them because they can just walk out the door, whereas quite often women can't do that because there might be children, we might be caring for somebody else. We are still very much in that home environment. So to drop everything and just walk out without any responsibilities is a huge thing. And then to actually be noticed and valued for having something to say about this great outdoors, this wild world is another level, for publishers to pick up on that as well. So that I think fundamentally that women are seen still sort of in the home. That of course that's changing, but it is still filtering its way through, I think, publishing. And
yeah, I very much agree with what you're saying. I mean, I've been very lucky. I've had some wonderful experiences with some very supportive male nature writing authors. But for me, I feel like there's a difference in voice when men and women write about nature. And I think that's starting to change. We're starting to kind of drift away from that authoritative, this is nature, I know about this is what it is, and we're drifting into this, I'm not sure what this is, why don't you come and look at it with me, why don't we explore it together? And I feel that for me is where the nature writing is changing and drifting into, and I think when you read nature writing, if you're reading a lot of the same voices, you assume that that's what nature writing is. But as we start to read a broader range, we start to change our opinion on how we write about it.
So do you think, I suppose it's quite interesting to see how the publishing industry has obviously picked up that there is this shift and that people have an appetite for a different type of nature writing. Do you think, I mean, is it a little bit chicken and egg? Which came first? Is it just a sense of, here's another opportunity? There are all these sort of untapped voices that we perhaps haven't heard, and also because the genre has grown so much in the last few years, or that these voices, maybe something is shifting in the way women are living and engaging with the outdoors, that something has shifted, and therefore there is more opportunity. I mean, I'm very interested in what creates barriers for women getting outdoors. And you've mentioned, family commitments and the sort of things that women very often take on. People have said to me also about issues of safety. Is that something you've ever thought, that it might be a reason not to sort of go off adventuring?
Yeah, I think it absolutely is. I think there's a great camaraderie that has built up, and I think seeing. I mean, I was writing for the RSPB, my local newspaper, when Kathy and Jamie's article came out, and it was that yes, it was a really powerful moment. And I remember her first book. That there was a particular line that's become quite famous about between the washing and taking the kids to school, that's when nature enters our lives. And I think it is that kind of everyday, that different perspective, the bringing along with you and the personal and love. I think, we might get onto that later, but it's sort of being able to show your feelings towards nature, which the scientific might not do. But yeah, I think I think social media has had a big thing to the growth of that as well, that connection of women's voices and being able to blog about things. And then I think this sort of rise of voices comes up and then people start to notice.
How did you get discovered?
Yeah, I won a competition, which is it's not easy to do because so I won the BBC Wildlife New Nature Writer of the Year. It was a very long title. Back in, I think it was 2004. So I won that, and I wrote about my son and taking him out and doing what my mum did with me. I suppose taking me out into nature, showing me things. He was on my a backpack at the time. He's 21 now, but I wrote about that. And won the competition. And then with that, I went to my local newspaper. I was a female editor there, but she was very fierce. And I said, look, you used to have actually a column of writers that wrote about the natural world. It was called From the Hedgerows. And I said, but there's nothing there anymore. I'd really like to do this. And she said, well, okay, we'll give you a go. Don't do anything controversial. That's changed. And away you go. And all these years later, I'm still doing that, which is brilliant. And with that sort of confidence and that sort of permission it gave me, I went to the RSPB and I said, love what you do, love your magazine. It's full of men. Where there's not a single woman in it. And can I write a column? And the great Rob Hume brought me up and said, yeah, I think you've got something here. Don't write anything controversial. For many years, I wrote for the RSPB about family because that was the role they put me in, interestingly. But I've kind of broadened out now. But that's what got me going. And then I think blogging and Twitter has been amazing. I think it's those voices, yeah.
What's your experience, Jeni? Because you're active on social media and you've also won a prize for your writing. How is that opening doors for you?
So I'm really kind of like moved by what Nicola said about the social media and that rising of voices. And I feel like, I know we've talked about it between us about owning opinions. And it can be very, very hard as a woman to own your opinion and stand by it because you're scared of something controversial. And I think that's where the beauty of social media comes in, because you've got like-minded people there agreeing with you, bolstering you. So yeah, for me, social media has been amazing. It's been a great platform. I've got a wonderful amount of connections. I feel really empowered. And that's just kind of encouraged me to maybe move forward with my writing and perhaps start to write some controversial stuff. Maybe.
We've got you back. You'll be fine.
Thank you.
Excellent. It is sort of, I think we've touched on this already, but the fact that women do often write about nature in a different way, in a particular way. And I noticed when I was looking on the shelves in our shop that in our nature memoir section, so many of them are by women. And they write about their sort of lived experience of the natural world. And it is very different from the kind of, this is a swallow and this is what swallows do and so on, or whatever it might be. That sort of more arm's length approach. And I'm really interested in why that is. Why do or maybe we're just stocking the wrong or the right, or we have a bias towards a nature memoir, but why do women often find themselves writing, you have done, Nicola, with On Gallows Down. And I'm interested also in the perception of the value of those books, because sometimes they're sort of seen as being not quite as, not as academic. What place do they have, do you think, within this genre?
I think they've got an enormously powerful place, and I think that will grow and grow because we are in the midst of an ecological, a wildlife crisis, an environmental crisis, and what you have to... I was speaking to Amy Jane Beer yesterday, she's a fantastic writer, but she's a scientist, and she's been writing, so Dr. Amy Jane Beer, she's been writing scientifically about nature for a long time, but I think it was about 7-8 years ago, she realised that actually what we've got to do is move people. We've got to make personal connections with people, which means telling them about our lives, telling them about how nature means something to us. It's about love and feelings. We might know, what sort of habitat a nightingale needs, but unless we can think about how it impacts that song and the loss of those birds impacts on us personally, how we feel that, we're not going to get people on board. It needs to galvanise people, I think. And I think in the past, that sort of scientific voice, which again is very much needed, but I think we have to have what does it mean to us? Otherwise, we're never going to move forward.
When you talk about, when you're kind of like assessing nature writing and examining it, when you look at it, people will tell you that good nature writing is sensory. It's focusing on what you can see, what you can smell, maybe what you can touch, if you're brave, what you can taste. But for me, as a woman, feeling is just an extension of the senses. And I'm really interested when I'm writing about why I'm moved by a particular thing. And that to me, like, so today I'm watching you guys, and I'm also watching the house martins and the swallows that are dipping about the trees, and they will stay with me. That will be an anchoring point for this moment. And yeah, I think we really need to start leaning into feelings, because it's about, like you say, making people care. And some people will be really kind of like turned on by the facty stuff, and that's what initiates compassion in them. But for others, and I know for me, it's if it hits me here, then I want to do something about it.
I think just as an aside, there was a recent newspaper article about, I don't know if anybody saw it, about cuckoo spit.
Oh, yeah.
Lots of people. Gosh. What the actual... So cuckoo spit, if you don't know, is created by this fantastic tiny frog hopper bug, or a spittle bug. And, the science, I'm going to sketch over the science, but they basically sort of stab into the stalk of a plant and suck out the juices and use it. And then they literally fart out the bubbles and create this wonderful sort of shield around them. So they are, it's a survival tactic. And the newspaper was reports, well, watch out for this terrible, dangerous bug. It don't get the spit on you, or anyway, And I think it was based from some very old American journal that there was some bacterial. It absolutely not here. But for me, this spittle bug is about my own childhood. When you walk through a meadow in the hot sun of the day and your legs are wet, what's that? What is this stuff? And but also passing that on to my children, telling them about this. We call it the bubble bum. And it means something. So I think there were a lot of very furious people going, "What are you talking about? This is an amazing. You can lick this stuff."
Have you ever?
Talking about taste. I haven't. I'm wondering if Jeni has.
No, I haven't. I definitely haven't. I'm not going to either.
Something that interests me, just as an aside on that, is if you are a writer and you said, you're already clocking what's going on around
Can't
you.
help it.
Is it so? Can you sometimes just appreciate that? Are you always thinking about how am I going to explore that? Does it become a bit of a poison chalice sometimes, that you're always thinking about how you articulate your love of nature?
That's really interesting. I was thinking about this on the way over, and especially as for the past 2 years, a little while ago, but I was studying an MA in nature writing. And I got to a stage where I actually got quite disconnected from nature because of that exact reason. I was looking at something and I was constantly looking for patterns, or what does this mean? Or how can I relate this to the bigger picture? And I had to really have a talk with myself and just be like, Jeni, it's totally okay to just go and stand in a field and be. So yeah, I don't know how have you found that?
Yeah, because sometimes the deadlines come thick and fast. So the Guardian's once a month, Countryfile's once a month, but usually you're writing. Guardian's quite immediate, and my local newspaper column is quite immediate. Countryfile's a couple of months ahead, and RSPB is so far ahead I almost have to refer to what happened the year before. So I've kind of learned just to enjoy it, and you can think, oh right, okay, I'm gonna go and write about badgers. I'm going to go to the badger set, which I know where I'm going. I know there'll be badgers, and you can go there. And they'll decide to have a lion, and it won't come out. And you're left writing about a snail that you saw climb up a stalk. So I think if you ever get to thinking like that, nature goes, just, it kind of does that. You just go and whatever comes. Yeah.
Delving deeper into the subject of nature memoir, I've noticed that there is something about, I'm going to call it a small explosion of new nature writing by women who self-identify as working class. And we've had wonderful books like Undercurrent by Natasha Carthew and her exploration of rural poverty in Cornwall, which is something we were talking about before. Yeah. Your own book, Nicola, on Gallows Down. And then this week, Rural by Rebecca Smith, which has had a lot of press coverage. Yes. But what those books seem to have in common is that often those who labour in nature have the least control over what's happening to it. And I think that is really interesting. Do you see this as a new kind of subgenre? And is it a coincidence that many of its voices appear to be women?
That's interesting. I think, I wonder. And I think firstly, labouring in a rural, I started off working with horses. That's how I met my husband. I in my 20s, I did the odd bit of farm work. I wanted to be a farmer, always wanted to be a farmer. I had my little farm on my carpet, my little bedroom carpet farm for until I was probably too old to be doing that, really. But I loved it, and I couldn't be a farmer because my dad wasn't a farmer and I wasn't married to one. So I think that in that way, that countryside, that rural involvement actually in the land is it's very different for women. But I think we need to extend that idea of rural work to working in the community. I'm my husband's a paramedic in a rural community. I'm a school librarian in a rural community, and I'm connected through that, my little rebel library of students that whose parents, mostly their dads actually, but are gamekeepers, are farmers, one or two conservationists in there. But they're also cleaning for big houses. That feudal system is still very much alive. So that rural work is very I think when we really think about it, and actually if you read Rebecca's book, Rural, which is out this week, it's wonderful. But she will class all sorts of work in that rural genre. But yeah, I wonder if that's why there are so few, because usually you've got the farmers writing. You've got A Shepherd's Life author, temporarily forgotten his name. That's terrible. But you have fun, and that's very, very important because they are working in that land. But I think it's a different work. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. And I think we were having a conversation on Twitter about this the other day, about the scattiness of kind of rural working. Like, I'm a cleaner, I'm a writer, but I'm a cleaner and a dog walker and a house sitter and all of these kind of like scatty jobs. And I think it goes back to that, what we think nature writing is, and it's from that male perspective of it's working the farms, it's working the land, when actually it's bigger than that. To be working within, to be a working class person, it's bigger than that. It's bigger than just the farms. And yeah, so I think I really like that question. And is it a subgenre of nature writing? And I don't know if it's a subgenre or it's just different doors opening. We're starting to get the voices from different people, and it just so happens that at the moment it's being championed because the class thing is a huge thing at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. It's James Rebanks, of course, English pastoral and Shepherd's Life. Very important voices, but yes, and Natasha Carthew, I think she talks. There's very few men in her book. She sort of grew. It's a very ragey, fierce book, full of power, but it's also that love and that power from women and those rural jobs. But I think even I read something recently about someone that had gone back to the idea of enclosure and what happened then and how it really affected women and that little sort of subsistence, how they would go out with the children and they would forage and they would collect things and whatever it was, but bringing back furs for the bread ovens, and that would be women's work and children's work. So they would be very much the hedgerows, the sort of the verges, and were really fenced out and affected by enclosure more, I think, than the men. Yeah.
Nicola, you said that you have been an activist for nature all your life, and anyone who's read On Gallows Down will know your different experiences and the forms that has taken. Do you think women have a particular power of persuasion when it comes to activism?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I think so. Yeah, I really do, because I think we are... I think we can be quite clever and witchy about things. We can tell stories and make connections. But I think also we are, on the whole, women generally don't like confrontation. It doesn't get us anywhere. I think we need to stand up for ourselves and we need to engage. And that actually is a kinder, gentler approach. A bit of flattery goes a long way. Then you can really get in there. But I think it's that kind of friendly, gentle, sort of unconfrontational approach, and I think there's a lot of power. Taking your children along is brilliant.
So has it worked for you? Have you had any particular successes through?
I have and I haven't. I think sometimes the mighty things just take over. I mean, Newbury Bypass 6 years ago, I think now. Yeah, there was a huge mixture of people there, but I think the hearts and minds of that, which was very much sort of where I was coming from. I think we won that battle. I think the road is there. It's quite often clogged up with traffic, but I think we did. There were no road building programs. Actually, there haven't been any big ones since then. And I can't claim that that's all just people being very very gentle and kind and nice, but I think it's that the hearts and minds. It also costs them an awful lot of money, but I think there are other ways you can do it. I was recently approached a local farmer. We had lapwings in the field next door. You've seen this on Twitter, haven't you? Well, there were two things happened with two different farmers, but within days of each other. But we'd noticed that lapwing were nesting in a field they hadn't done for many, many years. So literally the last lapwings in the village. And I'm fairly sure they came off the top of the hill behind us where a stone curlew plot, so an acreage of ground that was ploughed up for stone curlews to nest on and lapwings to nest on. And that had been ploughed back up to reset and restart a conservation programme. So the lapwings had found their way in the village. But I was able to get in touch with the local farmer and praise him on Facebook, which is always a good thing, and say, look, wow, you've got these birds on your land. That's amazing. You must be doing something right. Look, everybody, come and see these birds. Keep your distance, but yeah. And he came on board and he said, okay, I'll delay my ploughing. We'll mark where the nests are. And those birds were protected. And up on the hill, I found a stone curlew. And I was able to flag down the tractor and the sprayer that was coming for these birds and say, yeah, there's no place. You've made a place for them. Now you've ploughed it up. Where do you think they're going to go? I put it more gently than that. He said, yeah, okay, do you know what? I will put the coordinates of the bird into my tractor computer and the tractors will now avoid those birds. And I said, you're just the best farmer in the world, apart from the one down there as well. You are. So it's that has worked. Yeah.
Jeni, would you describe yourself as an activist?
Oh gosh, I've never really thought about it in that way. But I will take some inspiration from what I heard you talk about at one of your wonderful talks, in that writing is a radical act. And I think I can't come at it from a scientific background. I don't have that. I am not an expert in that field, but I'm an expert in how I feel and think. And I think Tiffany Francis Baker, she talks a lot about conservation through like creative kind of acts. And I like to think that hopefully that's what I'm doing. It goes back to that thoughts and feelings and hearts and minds and love. And I'm trying to kind of paint things in a certain light that sparks some inspiration. And so maybe an activist, maybe I need to work on it a bit.
No, I think you absolutely are. You are. And that writing is a radical act because you're bringing people to the wonder of these things and how precious they are, and you absolutely do that. Yeah.
Okay. You do.
Excellent.
We've been speaking this morning, obviously, about women in nature writing, but there are clearly many other underrepresented voices in this world, including people of colour and the LGBTQ plus community. What do you think are the risks to both the literary and the actual landscape if those voices aren't heard?
It's huge, absolutely huge. I think, and I feel that we're only just waking up to this. But if we're going to save wildlife, the climate, if we're going to save ourselves, we need everybody on board. It can't just be this, we've learned that it can't just be this white male thing. It can't be a white woman thing either. It is vital. And I think there are some wonderful stories out there already, some fantastic books that are already influencing, braiding sweetgrass. There's a fantastic piece actually by Zakia Mackenzie who writes in, I think it's the Wild Isles anthology. And she writes about the lignum vitae tree, which is indigenous to the Caribbean. But it was brought over here with slaves and with profits from, all sorts of terrible things. But it is here in our nature. It's the wood that makes cricket bales. It's the wood that makes croquet balls.
Wow.
It couldn't be more English, but the history of it is, so she really brings that. And I think so many incredible voices like that there are so many stories to be told. So I'm quite excited about that. Yeah.
I think we've spoken a lot today about rural communities and rural writers, and again, stemming from what you read as nature writing becomes what you think it is. But actually, nature is for everyone. It's not just for people who live in the countryside or in these edgelands. And I think it's really important to kind of champion urban nature, edgeland nature, and all of the voices that come with that, because we need to think of it as a whole and collective. You can't divide. It becomes exclusive, and you risk people not caring about it. So I think the more voices that come from a wider range of places and landscapes is going to do the nature writing canon a world of good.
Yeah, I think absolutely, and it affects us all. I think it's a lot of it has to do with that land ownership, but how something you can get a big vast estate in the countryside that has less wildlife on it than in your local town. And how can it not? It's the earth we stand on, the air we breathe, all of these things. It's got to be everybody.
Yes. So what do you think needs to change to make nature more accessible for all?
Well, I'm quite interested in the right to roam proposal that's coming. It's complex, it's complicated in some ways, but we need to have access to nature in all the different ways. We talked earlier about women, didn't we? We didn't really, I might have missed that, but we need to make these places safer and more inviting for people to come to. You need to be able to see, as a school librarian, the books I stock, you need to be able to see yourself in a book. And I think you need to be able to see yourself in the countryside. And I think that's a really powerful thing. And I know the National Trust are doing great things actually as well, and unearthing different histories. But it has to be more access to the countryside. And we need to bring rural spaces, as it were, the idea of that, to the towns, to urban spaces. There needs to be that connection. We can't be chopping down trees in cities. They are important to people. We've seen that with Sheffield and with Plymouth. Birds like blackbirds, swifts, wrens and robins show us that our cities can be natural spaces, and I think we need to build on that.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think the right to roam movement is fantastic. It's doing fantastic things, and I think they're approaching it in a wonderful way, in that they're considering arguments from all over the place, and they're not unwise to the fact that it's a complicated subject. So I think we need to be pushing forward with that. But I also think education is a real key for accessibility to nature. You go into the schools or, talk to children, and even like my own nieces and nephews at one point couldn't necessarily identify different bird species. I helped them with that. But yeah, you're handing keys to people. If you can teach someone about species identification, or teach someone about bird song, or what might be in this habitat, you're handing out these keys to all, again, another door analogy, all of these different doors, and through opening those doors, you're creating more accessibility.
I like that expression.
I love that.
It's very good. I might adopt that. Just before we open up for questions from the audience, I wanted to ask about your own favourite authors and whether there are any particular rising stars that you would recommend we look out for.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, there are so many. I've read, so Victoria Bennett has a book out, All My Wild Mothers, actually from a working class background as well, and how she brought her children up, her son up on a rural council estate, and her engagement with nature was building this fantastic apothecary garden. That's a wonderful read. Caro Giles as well. 4 daughters, bringing them up on her own, and a lot of sea swimming involved, in the moons. It's called 12 Moons. That's a fantastic book. Again, these personal narratives, aren't they? But I think they're an awful lot. There's Jen Jones as well.
Yes,
she's a fantastic writer.
Incredible.
She's got a manuscript out there called A Teaspoon of Soil. Somebody needs to pick that up.
So important.
Yeah.
So important. And I know Jen, and she writes incredibly, and she's just so knowledgeable, just all around lovely person. Yeah, Teaspoon of Soil, definitely. That is up and coming.
And your own favourite authors?
Okay.
Oh,
Without
goodness.
sounding like a complete fangirl, Nicola is played a big part in my nature writing journey, just through what we were talking about earlier, and that empowering and just that quiet radicalism just chipping away. But also Natasha Carthew, who is running the Working Class Prize for Nature Writers. I think I got that right. She was one of the first authors I picked up, and I realised that nature writing could be something other than non-fiction, that it could be a beautiful bit of prose that is gritty and sometimes uncomfortable to read. And yeah, I do quite like an uncomfortable read sometimes. I like to be challenged. And yeah, so those are 2 of my favourite authors.
Excellent recommendations. Thank you. We have time for a few questions. So does anybody have anything they would like to ask our panellists? Do we need the microphone?
I'd just like to say thank you for sitting in the rain.
Yes.
I feel like I want to sort of scoot you in here, really.
First, thank you for the talk. That was very, very interesting to hear. I think I speak on behalf of everyone to say that was a very, very interesting talk.
Oh, thank you.
You spoke a lot about women as, I'm going to say, emotive nature writers rather than scientific nature writers. Do you think that there's a concern that by focusing on women as emotive writers, not scientific, that we are diminishing the opportunities for female scientific writers?
I think there are some fantastic female scientific writers out there. Lucy Jones, I think. Admittedly, yes, we need to have, it's like balance, isn't it? We need the balance with everything we're doing, and there is space to have science and emotion. They can go together.
Yeah, absolutely. Amy Jane Beer as well. I think we definitely need to make that link, and I think there can be that there are plenty out there, and the merging of the two, I think, is a powerful thing. But yeah, I definitely think we do need to be aware of that. Yeah.
Thank you very much again. I've recently read Amy Liptrott's The Instant, and I was really struck by how she managed to weave the kind of our sort of digital and technological world into her experience of the city and nature within the city. And I wondered if you had any thoughts about other ways of we're talking about accessibility and bringing people along in education, and it's one thing to kind of go out into a field and feel nature. But I found it really interesting how she used the kind of languages that people who don't necessarily have access to the natural world might understand as a way in. And I just wondered if you had any thoughts about that, or other ways in which we might connect people who are not necessarily, people aren't necessarily there.
Yeah, I think technology is a very powerful thing, and I mean, it's a tool to be used, and it can actually bring that magic into. I mean, there's a wonderful thing called knock migging, which is nocturnal migration, where you can set up a recorder wherever you are, and it will pick up the sounds of birds migrating over the city overnight. Things that we weren't aware of, and you can actually identify them. Things like, I was talking to Mum about it earlier, the Merlin bird app on your phone. So wherever you are, you can go out and you can identify what birds are singing, and learn from that. I definitely, and I think can connecting with other people that are going out and see. I don't get out much. I mean, I get out much, but not in a wide radius. And I think it brings what's going on elsewhere to you, and you can get involved in that as well. That story, which very powerful thing.
I think, I wouldn't be anywhere without my Merlin bird app, or Seek. Seek is a really good app as well. You have to watch it for the Americanisms, but it's ace. And I think it's about tuning in. It can be hard if you're, and this way is what it comes back to what we were talking about, is we need more than just rural voices. We need, high-rise flats, council estates, those kind of edgelands, because nature is there. And once you've kind of tuned into it, you can't unsee it. It's really special. But yes, I agree. It's getting there. So apps, Facebook groups, Twitter, social media, people pointing out, I saw such and such at this place. So community. I think community will really help that.
Any more questions? No? In that case, it just leaves me to thank our brilliant panellists, Nicola Chester and Jeni Bell. Nicola, if I could persuade you, you might come down to the bookshop and sign copies of On Gallows Down for us, which is just at the back of the stable yard. Thanks also to the National Trust for hosting us here at Stourhead, our AV production team, PYTCH, who, along with SolCell, have enabled this Planted Talks programme to be powered entirely by renewable energy. If you've enjoyed this talk, please visit the Planted website at planted-community.co.uk for more articles, interviews and information about the issues we've been discussing in these talks over this weekend. And in the meantime, please enjoy the rest of Planted Country and take time to visit some of the amazing environmentally focused businesses and organisations who have partnered with Planted as we attempt to reconnect people and places with nature. And finally, thank you all for being here in the rain and for watching and listening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mel.